be said in the language of the people. In these proposals, the Jansenists were joined by the Gallicans, a movement which had begun in France and spread across the continent, which was directed toward the governance of the Church, particularly seeking to limit papal authority over local churches and bishops. In 1786, just 10 years after the United States declared its freedom from Great Britain, these, along with more than 60 other revolutionary proposals, including demands for Mass in the language of the people and insistence that the priest face the people, were approved by a group of bishops at the ill-fated Synod of Pistoia. 8 years later, a total of 85 articles of that synod were condemned by Pope Pius VI in the papal bull Auctorem Fidei. This bull condemns the simplification of the rites, the use of vernacular language in the Mass, and the praying of the canon aloud. It states that these proposals are rash, offensive to pious ears, and divisive in the Church where it encourages heretical gatherings. Speaking directly to the proposal that the common language of the people, the vernacular, would make it easier for the Mass goers to join their voices to the rest of the Church, Pius VI responded by insisting that such a claim was false, rash, disturbing to the order prescribed for the celebration of the mysteries, and easily productive of many evils. How prophetic these words have turned out to be. Lest the point be missed, the primary reason for recounting these particular details is to help those who watch this video to understand that the call for the Mass to be simplified, the call for the Mass to be said in common language of the people, the call for the priest to turn around and face the people, the call for a more inclusive liturgy, the call for the canon of the Mass to be said aloud. None of these just appeared at or near the time of the Second Vatican Council. The movement, and indeed it was a movement, that had grown with ever-lessening resistance since the days of Luther, Cranmer, and Calvin, only reached its peak, culminating in the heady days of Vatican II. In order to show this clearly, let me draw your attention to Padre Antonio Rosmini, an Italian priest and founder of the Rosminians, an order dedicated to the education of youth. In 1832, only 2 years after Our Lady appeared to St. Catherine Labouré and gave to the world the miraculous medal, Antonio Rosmini completed a book, The 5 Wounds of Christ, which, once published, became widely read among the progressivist clergy throughout Europe. In it, the priest relates what he perceives to be the 5 particular things in his day which most wounded Christ. The first of these he refers to as the division between the priest and the people at public worship. Rosmini believed that the people's lack of understanding of the Latin language, combined with the distance between the people and the priest, had caused a division. Insofar as the Mass was concerned, or more precisely, the people's participation in the Mass, Rosmini came to the same conclusion in 1832 that Luther and his fellow revolutionaries had come to 300 years earlier, that the distinction between the priest and the people was too distinct, a separation too great between them had occurred, and because Latin had long since ceased to be a language the ordinary people understood, they were unable to understand what was going on in the Church's liturgy, and therefore unable to fully participate. Contrary to either Luther's proposal or that which was ultimately adopted by Pope Paul VI, Rosmini rightly proposed that, if modern languages are excluded, only 2 solutions are at hand. First, the study of Latin amongst the faithful should be encouraged as much as possible. Better teaching methods would be of great help here. Second, the Christian people should be given a thorough grounding in the meaning of the sacred functions, while the literate faithful, and all should be able to read, need to be introduced habitually to divine services with the help of books containing a translation of the Latin used in Mass. And this brings us to a couple of facts little known among Catholics. The Council of Trent, acting to correct Luther's heresy, placed an anathema upon anyone who would even suggest that the Mass should be said in the vernacular alone. Further, the Church had always maintained a prohibition against the translation of the Mass from Latin into any other language. There were two particular reasons for the Church's ban on translations. First, the sacred mystery of the Mass, because it is an action of the priest in the person of Jesus Christ, is sublime, and the Church felt it should always remain that way. The second reason is obvious based on what can be seen today. Accurate and effective translation soon gives way to the interpretation of the most recent translator, until there are translations with a variety of meanings. Likewise, the Church had consistently forbidden the translation of Holy Scripture for the same reasons. Only after the publication of Luther's Bible and some early English Bibles did the Church commission and authorize translation into the English. The Old Testament was translated at Douay and the New Testament at Reims. But even with the Bible translated into some vernacular languages, the prohibition of translating the Mass in common languages remained in effect. Despite this prohibition, in 1660 an English-French missal was prepared and ready to be released in France. Acting on information that the introduction of the dual-language missal was merely a ruse by the Jansenists to forward their cause for the vernacular Mass, Pope Alexander VII issued a condemnation of any such missal and prohibited under penalty of excommunication any printing, reading, or possession of the missal in the strongest of terms. In his papal bull, Ad Horas Nostras, the Pope prohibits this missal for all time and concludes by proclaiming that, under pain of excommunication latae sententia, to be incurred by vigor of the law itself, we forever forbid its printing, reading, and possession. The last prohibition issued by Rome came in 1857, in the words of a decree which stated, "It is not permitted to translate the ordinary of the Mass into the vernacular and print the same for the use of the faithful, nor can such a work get the approbation of a bishop." In spite of the existing prohibitions at the time, in 1822 the first American translation of the Latin Missal was published by Bishop John England of Charleston. We refer to that Missal because it enjoyed broad use among Catholic faithful throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Bishop England carefully explains why Latin is used as the language of the Mass in terms we can all understand. The doctrine of the Church is essentially unchangeable, hence a dead language which is subject to no change as to the meaning of its expressions is far better calculated to preserve it unchangeably than modern languages which are perpetually varying. Not until 1877 did Blessed Pope Pius IX allow any bishop to authorize layman's missals, and Pope Leo XIII later put them on the ordinary imprimatur basis. But let's get back to Rosmini, who understood this point very well. Both a priest and recognized philosopher, Rosmini makes it clear that changing the language of the liturgy to the common language of the people is not the answer. He writes, "I have not enumerated all the advantages of ancient languages, nor all the disadvantages of modern languages. But what I have said is sufficient to show conclusively that the damage caused by the separation of clergy from people in the sacred services cannot be remedied by introducing new languages into the churches. The use of these languages in place of those consecrated by